Okay, folks, we're ready to get started again. So we're going to start the afternoon with our panel discussion. We are going to go with the same question we had yesterday to warm everybody up, and then we'll elicit other questions. I hope that Jason and Paul are online.
Yes, good afternoon.
Okay, great. Good, great. I see both your names. Okay, sounds real good. So the question we're going to start off with is, what areas dealing with zero trust need further research? And how about we'll start with you, Paul. Do you have your ideas in that area?
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. When you're thinking about the work that's happening in zero trust today, particularly you'll see the additional CSW P20 that came out to clarify the meaning of a session, what a session means. I think that as we think about per request access decisions, per request logging, basically standardizing in what that means, a session is going to be a really important concept there. And I know there's clarification documents around that. I think allowing people to understand what that means, defining that more clearly is going to help overall architectures and frameworks.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Jason, do you want to take a pass next, please, sir?
Sure. So I've been thinking a bunch about the notion of a central nervous system, if you will, and you have a set of maybe disconnected elements or distributed elements of your ecosystem that need to communicate with one another. And the notion of how do we as an industry make both data and events, zero trust context and events available across these different distributed semi-independent areas. So earlier I gave the example of a DLP system that should have the ability to assume session or identity context to make some decisions within itself around this identity and what data elements they should or shouldn't be allowed to see. So there's definitely, I think, some work that needs to be done there. And there are some emerging areas. There's I think that's part of the OpenID Foundation called Shared Signals and Events, which defines a vocabulary and a protocol for exchanging some limited vocabulary of security events that I think is a good starting point. There's another thing called the Open Cybersecurity, the name escapes me at the moment, schema framework for defining security events. So I think that's an interesting area. There isn't anything I found that yet captures this notion of a zero trust context. So I think the vocabulary and protocol and the event model for that, I think, is an interesting area for us to look at.
Okay, thanks very much. I appreciate that. Jose, how about, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah, and so the one area that I think from a research perspective and an area that can help us all start today and start adopting is a definition of the minimum requirements of a zero trust system in production, right? And we can agree on what that is. CISA did an excellent job in laying out the cybersecurity maturity model, showing the different pillars, maturity along those pillars. But if we look at the map that's created, I believe it's at least 8 by 5 of different areas of maturity that an agency can go on. And often in many of the conversations we have, agencies can struggle to understand where to start and what is the minimum baseline that creates an effective security strategy in production, right? And I think we can help research and define that to give confidence for people to move forward to. Because as we've all agreed and we talked today, zero trust is a strategy. It's not a product you buy, it's not something that you do. So how do I know if I'm effectively following the strategy? And how do I know if I can take systems that have important government information on them that may have visible moderate data involved, that they're accessed via the internet? How do I know if I'm meeting the requirement for a system that can maintain this and be put into production? And right now, the lens is through kind of a traditional on-prem data center visible mindset, where that mindset needs to shift, and we need to be able to give confidence into our agencies to be able to understand that they can put this in production, that they can light these systems up, and that they are following zero trust principles.
Okay, thank you, Jose. That was very nice. How about Mike? I'll go down the line.
Sure. So I think that one of the challenges that you have to think about zero trust areas that need research is the applications and data, they're migrating around a lot faster than they ever did before. It's just that, they're not staying in one place. An example of that would be, this is more a commercial example, but you have data and applications that are pushed out to CDNs, and then from there, people are starting to do things in WASM, where you've got pieces of the application, pieces of data that are actually in the client side on the browser. And that is probably far away from where government will be for some time. But the frameworks for securing that need to be put in place because people are going to push that direction. They want to get things as close as possible to the users.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Mike. How about Chase? What are your thoughts, sir?
I think the biggest one that stands out to me is that we need to move some of the research away from the specific technical stuff around ZT, and it needs to be focused really on the business side of the equation. We've got volumes of data on how to do security for ZT, however, but what we're lacking to really drive adoption fast is this business side of the equation. I would love to see research done specifically on the age off and sort of which things die the death they deserve as you move towards ZT. So that you could go to a business and say, look, if you engage in this practice and this is your plan and this is your strategic approach, these things will go away. Here's where your optimization occurs, that dollar for dollar type of approach. And then the other thing I think on the technical side that I'm doing some early work with a couple of people on is a validation protocol within a ZT environment. Not a certification, not a compliance thing, but literally a transactional validation of if this thing occurs with these pieces of the puzzle each and every time, that is a validated transaction that occurred within the context of a zero trust environment. Therefore, I don't need to look at that. And I think what that does is ultimately removes the noise from the system so that you know what an anomaly is, and because it is not inside of that validated transactional back and forth. And that the sticks and taxi and those types of things have proven that this type of standard logic is available. It just has to be mushed into the ZT approach so that you can have that type of thing. I imagine in a few years that we would have a protocol standard around validated zero trust transactions. And I think that will be one of those things where, from the adversary perspective, if they see that and they know that that's present, they just go away because it is literally not worth their effort.
Oh, this is great. Yeah, I have to work on my goals and objectives here, so I appreciate all your help in this manner. I struggle at times to think about some of these different things, so thank you very much for that. I know we had one question for Jason we wanted to get asked, and then we'll come back and ask a couple more, but I didn't want to forget, I missed one when yours wrapped up there, Jason. So.
I was in the transition between Jason and Paul, so this is from Phil. What does IPv6 do to change the way you incorporate network level controls into ZT? How does it make sense does it make sense to use the traditional network defense as a complement to ZT, or should everything live in one paradigm?
Big question.
I don't have a good answer for that at this point. I'm going to have to take a pass.
Okay, does anybody else want to try? Or
I think the crux of that really is the question about whether or not there's value in an IPv6 instead of an IPv4 sort of instantiation of ZT. Doesn't really matter, I don't think. Just more numbers and more addresses based on space that you can fill. The strategy applies the same across either specific side of it. So you need to move up level, not we get stuck in the forest looking at the trees instead of looking at the forest. I think, and it's a really valid question, but there's not really like Jason said, there's not really a specific good answer to that one.
right?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree to that. If you look at NIST, they actually call out IPv4 and IPv6 in the 802.07. But the thing is, according to the 802.07, it's about resource access, application access. To your point, if you're looking at it at the IP level, you're looking too low in the stack. You're like layer 4, or even lower than that. IPv4 and IPv6 are just a transport of information. And when you're creating your zero trust policies, you're doing them around applications and resources, not necessarily network constructs, although you can. But there should be no difference in terms of creating access control lists if you wanted to do something like that, or network constructs within a ZT environment. Whether it was an IPv4 or IPv6 address, it should support both.
Right. I would agree with what Paul had to say. At the end of the day, when it comes to the transport to get access to the applications, the strategy of Zero Trust applies to both IPv4 and IPv6. I don't believe that there would be one, deep specific advantage to using one stack over the other. But if we build a strategy to be able to create these Zero Trust connections with either stack, then I think we're thinking the right way from an architecture, design, and build perspective.
Okay, well, that sounds good. Okay, great. I was going to say, I was going to borrow, Chase, your question from yesterday. I kind of liked it. Well, at least what I remember of is, I would like to hear from both the ends. I know all of you are out there talking to customers and making your pitches and trying to understand what their thing is, but what are you tired of hearing about from your customers about Zero Trust? What aspects of your that's really not worth your time? You know what I mean? You'd like to say them, smack them upside the head a little bit and say, no, you really need to focus on this. Can you share some thoughts in that area? Chase, how about if you would start on that one?
Well, I think the first thing that I talk to them about is that this, there's this people bristling at you saying like, I shouldn't trust my employees. No, not at all. It's not zero faith, it's zero trust. So you should, have beers with your employees or whatever you do or blah, blah, blah. This is not about your people not being valuable and worthy of trust. This is about the history of a problem and being able to employ controls based on a fundamental understanding that makes a change in the game. So that's the one I think we spend the most time with, is convincing people that this is not going to be an HR fiasco. And moving, past that, and the other side of the equation there is to be able to go, ultimately, person who works for my company, I have a requirement to secure this environment better. If I do this better, you will get better, the business will get better, we don't lose revenue, we're not responding to ransomware events, et cetera. So I don't think it's at all, in my experience so far, I don't even have conversations necessarily more about the technology side of the equation. There's so much information out there. It's really about the human side of it, the business side of it, et cetera.
Okay, that sounds great. I'll go up to Paul. How about, what are your thoughts on that, Paul?
Yeah, there's some common ones. So first is, the most common is that you hear Zero Trust is about VPN replacement. And I think that when we hear that, it's like, that's the biggest misconception, which is, the location of a resource doesn't matter. So it speaks nothing about how sensitive a resource is, whether it sits on-prem or it's Microsoft Office 365 or it sits in AWS. And so Zero Trust, the concept being a little bit more broad and understanding that this is about making all of your applications private and inaccessible to anyone other than the people that need access to that. And if you design in that way, you then end up with, what Jason talked about, this concept of a single service that's providing these capabilities for connectivity and security across all of the resources. If you design for just a VPN replacement, and that's the only goal, then why don't you just keep the VPN and renew the license? I mean, it doesn't really help you to replace a VPN with another VPN. And then I would also say some other big misconceptions are around trying to classify the entire internet. So you forget that you start with enterprise zone resources. Right, an organization might have 1,000 of them, 500, whatever that number might be, but it's much less than the billions and billions and billions of websites out there. So I hear some crazy stuff like, I'd like to get the risk scores for some random application that sits out on the public internet because it's a risky application. The reality is, if someone's putting data in any application, whether it's Box, Dropbox, or anything else that the company doesn't own or the organization doesn't own, that's called data loss. You're not going to be able to go to someone's personal Dropbox account and pull the file, no different than a file sitting on their personal hard drive. So like, scoring the public internet is interesting, but knowing the impacts and the risk of the enterprise owned applications you own is even more interesting. And then I would say lastly, some people have this fear that there's no way I can lock the front door of these applications because that's going to be a management nightmare, where the reality is you're never really done with the Zero Trust transformation. So there is a huge benefit to get the highest impact, most sensitive resources and lock those down first. Because if you have a shell or a remote desktop or something that's OT or IoT, and there should only be 4 administrators touching that system, that's a pretty easy Zero Trust policy to set up. You're going to deny everybody but the 4 people. And the value that you get by doing that is that China and Russia and others don't have access to the front door of those most sensitive OT, IoT types of environments and applications. So, those are just a few interesting ones, but those are pretty common.
Okay, thanks, Paul. That sounds good. How about Jason? Would you share with your experience here?
One of the things that I've seen that impede enterprise adoption and success with Zero Trust is projects that tend to be bottom-up driven. If they don't have a top-down mandate to make changes, to make the appropriate changes in motivation and goals for the organization, you end up with, like Paul mentioned, I'm replacing the VPN with a Zero Trust network access solution. And what I end up doing is looking at this like a jigsaw puzzle, which is great. I'm replacing this moldy old VPN piece and throwing it away, but I'm replacing it with a shiny new Zero Trust piece, but it has to be exactly the same shape and size. And that is a modest improvement, but it's not fantastic. And it makes it harder to do this because now you're inheriting a set of dependencies and interdependencies that your VPN might have. You might have, for one example, we had a customer that was doing this and unfortunately taking this very tactical approach. Their VPN had a mechanism where it would log a certain thing in the Windows event log so they could have this script that ran to do some, to mount a Windows file share. So they needed their Zero Trust system to do exactly that. Instead of saying, all right, let's rethink how we're doing this. Let's not take and replace the puzzle piece with something exactly the same size. Now you magnify that and you end up with situations where you're replacing your VPN and maybe making some changes, but the NAC team isn't on board, or you still have 2 more years of depreciation on that before you get the budget for that. Having a top-down mandate to make these changes, make these things a lot easier and a lot more effective and valuable.
Okay, thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. Jose, you want to take this on it?
Yeah, so I would say the first thing, right, when it comes to what we hear from customers continuously is that we have moved out of the phase where, Zero Trust is a buzzword, or, we don't know what it is. What does it really mean? At this point in time, we have a really good grasp and a definition of what Zero Trust is. The real issue happened was there's a lot of vendors that were Zero Trust washing, traditional products and trying to convince people that they were Zero Trust when they really weren't. So today, I think we can all say, we know what Zero Trust is. Zero Trust is we want to change the way that we look at access to our applications and data, and it should not be dependent on having to be within a specific network and trusting everything within that specific network segment, right? If the people on this panel created a company tomorrow, the first thing that we would do is go buy a bunch of servers and then put a security stack. No, never do that, right? Like that doesn't make sense in most workloads today in 2022. The world of applications and data are out there, they're available in the cloud, and we want to give security and visibility and access to the users that need that at a point in time for when they need that. That's how we would create the company tomorrow, right, if we were going to start that. And that's the opportunity that all government agencies really and everyone has today, is to embrace the principles of Zero Trust and start leveraging those strategies on new systems right away. And we don't have to worry about what the definition is if we're thinking about that mindset of forward-looking, creating, building the security into the infrastructure that exists today. So I think we can all agree we should know what Zero Trust is. Let's agree on the definitions that are out there, and let's move along these strategies to get started today.
Okay, thanks. How about Mike, you finish up this question for us?
Thanks. So I would say that one of the things that I run into a lot is that there's a lot of people in the world who have deep experience and expertise using a certain technology or a certain stack. And apologies to all the CCIEs and CCNAs that are out there, but there's a whole lot of them. If you ask an IT person, how can they solve a problem, they will never tell you no, right? They will find some way to do it. It will just take a long time, and maybe it won't exactly look like what you wanted in the end. We had some customers that were doing things the old-fashioned way, take them 6 months to set up. And if they adopt new models, they do it in under 24 hours. They're just from the ticket to serving it. It can be really streamlined, but it takes a new openness to new approaches. You can't just think that because I'm certified on certain stack or technology that everything I do has to be fixed that same way. There are new things that are out there, and being open to that is beneficial for those who are willing to take it.
Okay, thank you. So I was going to ask another selfish question. Our role is to be an honest broker, and we try to give good advice to help a lot of people out. So if you were to give me, I would like you to tell me, as I'm going to be your honest broker, what is the one thing that we could do for you to help your life, make it better in your work? And I was wondering, Jason, if you would start with that, addressing that question. I know it didn't word it well, but I'm just looking for how you'd like to have somebody out there that actually is giving good advice out to people. What would you like to suggest?
I would love to see guidance for organizations, both commercial and public sector, on how do they measure their progress towards zero trust. We have these maturity models, but I think it's how does an organization really know that they're improving in one area versus another, and how do they make sure they're making progress and across all those different dimensions? That would be really interesting.
Okay, Mike, would you follow that one up?
Yeah, I'd probably echo what Jason said. I think that there are forcing functions, in government space, that you need to comply with PO 14028, right? So there is some, lever behind, getting people to move. In the commercial space, that isn't the case at all. And so people are doing things kind of ad hoc, and best practices are emerging and evolving, but some I think an awareness or framework or something I think is probably coming or needs to come.
Okay, great. Chase, how about yourself?
I think it would be really useful to get some published research from the SEI on the specifics of the budgeting that goes into this, so that organizations can understand what an investment cycle looks like, especially anything around the kind of blowing up the old model of if I have $100,000 and I put 10 grand in each bucket, by the nature of the transitive property of money or something or another, I eventually solve the problem. I think it'd be really good to see some dollars and cents research published to say, our data tells us that these are the things that actually make the difference.
Okay, that sounds good. Paul, what would your thought be?
Yeah, I think this ties into what the others are saying as well, which is the more clarity in terms of timeline that can be provided, the better. So when is it that you want to achieve that goal and work your way backwards from that? Because I think with all of the noise and confusion, sometimes there's efforts that are being done without the, as Jay said, the business objectives. Like, what is your actual goal? Are you retiring the VPN? Are you trying to decommission proxies? Maybe there's legacy proxies in place, or maybe it's VDI. There's certain things that are kind of going end of life and you need to modernize or meet the executive orders. Like, what is that date that you're looking to hit so that we can work our way backwards from that date?
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that, Paul. So I was wondering, anybody in the room have any questions you'd like to ask the panel?
Can the panel members, given that addresses in IPv6 are much more ephemeral, a given host uses an address less than once per year, how does this affect CTA?
You better have a hell of a policy engine.
You can't depend on the IP address, so you have to build that identity from something else that isn't ephemeral, so that if that thing moves,
Yeah, I would add, I think that's the point, right? Is we're so used to creating policies based off network addresses because of location. And because of that, we start thinking about just the sheer number of IPv6 addresses and what are we going to do about that? But if you're looking at this from an application perspective, application access and data access, the address is really not that relevant. So it really doesn't matter that there could be an IPv7, an IPv8 with even more addresses. It really doesn't matter, because I want to understand which application you're trying to access or what document you're trying to access. And the address is just being used as transport. But I would say that on the flip side, there's what's called the implicit zone. That's the area after the Zero Trust Service Edge. Basically, once you're being granted access to an application, I do think that's an area that there needs to be more research on, particularly with SaaS applications like Microsoft Office 365. If you have someone working from home that needs access to Office 365 without backhaul, you need to ensure that the Zero Trust Service Edge is the only thing that's authorizing that connection. And so I think that's the place where addresses might make sense, to create virtual wires, in a sense, from the service edge to the application, so that there's no way around the Zero Trust Edge. And I think that there's confusion there, because sometimes that gets mixed up with user IP addresses versus like service edge IP addresses. But I don't think we should be thinking in terms of addresses.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think from an architecture and design perspective, you know, again, when we're talking about application access, just like Paul mentioned, the underlying IP space can be dynamic, and it can be dynamic today. And at the end of the day, when the user is getting access to the application, the underlying stack can move, and we can still create a zero trust access through that. So looking up the stack and looking at the connection method there, we're not connecting to networks, right? And that's the big thing to come across to that question. We're connecting up the stack to applications without network access. And if I could add one thing, so I didn't get a chance to add what you could do for us. The one thing that I think would be great for SEI to take the lead on is to publish use cases of success in government. Because what's really amazing over the last, and I'll say, you know, two years really during the pandemic, is the rate of change in government, right? Notoriously, government moves slow, IT will move slow, change. That didn't happen over the last 2 years. We've seen systems go into production rapidly because there was a very critical need. And we have excellent success stories that can show government in action using zero trust principles. Those aren't shared that well. And I think we, as a community, the environment meeting together here with SEI, can publish those out to give those examples of what good looks like and the value, to your point earlier, that was reaped by using these use cases. So I think that's a really good opportunity that we have to be able to share information.
Thanks, Jose. Sorry you're done.
It's all good.
Okay, I think we have one more question.
So this is a little bit of a chicken and the egg question. So what would come first in your mind, since you're all ZT ambassadors? When organization begins their ZT journey, how do you recommend they start? Hardware, software changes, like microsegmentation or encryption, policy creation, something else? Like it's a marathon, sprint. So how does an organization set themselves up to succeed?
I could take the first shot at that. I mean, so we see this very often in the conversations that we have with our customers. They will look at, you know, a workload-based, workload-to-workload communication. They'll look at, you know, maybe a partner integrator-based communication. They'll look at, you know, SCADA systems. They'll look at, you know, I'll say, you know, internet disconnected workloads. They'll look at all of the different workloads and say, well, what can I do, right? How do I need zero trust for everything all the time and tomorrow, right? How can I accomplish that? What we think is a really good way to look at this is, where is there the biggest risk that you can mitigate, or you can, you know, be able to help your agency? And to me, that's with the users, right? At the end of the day, users are now everywhere, spread throughout the world, not in one location, not accessing apps and data in one location. So focus on the major attack issue that you can prevent, and that is with the users. Get the users up and running using zero trust principles. Get their access to applications and data using zero trust principles. And you could do that actually relatively quickly and get success in the near term. Once you have that and you get confidence in the principles, it's easier to work into workload communication. And now you could look at my workload to workload, how can I apply these principles here? And then, you know, from there I could get into, you know, G to G or you know, system integrator workloads, and I can move into, you know, protected SCADA systems and different types of access that's out there in the government that are on, maybe a smaller audience, right, but very critical and being able to make sure that we secure. But if you get the big use case of the users first, you'll learn a lot, you'll get confidence, and you can apply those principles in other mechanisms.
Okay. How about Jason, would you go next, please?
Sure. There's definitely no single right answer. I think that a great recommendation would be to find out where there's pain or where there are new projects and opportunity to insert zero trust into it. So whether it's we have a problem with some element of our system, whether it's our VPN for a certain class of users or PAM access or privileged user access, or there's a new project going on where we're spinning up workloads in an infrastructure as a service environment, and we're going down this pathway of, okay, we have to connect it up to the enterprise network. Anything that either is a known source of pain or a new project is a great way to start, even if it's small and relatively focused. And in fact, oftentimes those are the best first projects to have. I would say Zero Trust is a great catalyst for those of us who work in security and technology to make sure we build bridges and connections with our peers, with the business leaders and the project leaders across the organization, learn what they're struggling with or excited about, and see how we can get Zero Trust to be part of those things.
Okay, thank you. How about Paul, would you go?
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of the first deployment model of the 802.07, which is start with those remote users. I mean, they're struggling with slow connections. They need to access SaaS applications and other things. It's an easy use case, and it provides a lot of protection. I do think that that's a great place to start. It's an easy place to start as well. You can use an agent, it connects them to a service, and really solves a lot of problems with the least amount of effort.
Okay, thank you very much. Mike, you want to take your pass?
Yeah, I think, kind of similar to what I said in the presentation, I think you really need to start inside out and pick an application and implement the Zero Trust for it fully. And if that means that your step one is go buy some routers, then I think you need to rethink, what your plan is, how you're going to go about it. Maybe look a little harder at some other solutions that are out there. But the key thing is that you want to be able to demonstrate that you understood the problem and were able to completely solve it. And you can do that when the scope is limited to an application. It's hard to do at big scale, at least to do it well. And so I think that the government case, the memoranda, do recommend starting with the FISMA moderate. I think for the same reasons, just get a win on the board, show that you're doing something, that you understood it, that you actually solved the problem. In the commercial case, it's no different. In that case, usually there is, some problem that needs to be solved, and that has the attention of management and the board, and is at that level where action needs to be taken. Otherwise, people will just leave it for somebody else to figure out. So I think in that case, you again want to start with whatever that application is that's going to motivate people to actually take action.
Okay, thank you very much. Jason, you'll be the last one if you wrap it up first.
Yes, will be quick is what he's saying. So I think it really starts executive buy-in is first, stakeholder buy-in. I don't even, technology and whatever else, I know how to solve that problem. That's understood. I think if you don't have violent consensus from the people that are going to be driving this thing forward, away. So get that first.
Okay, thanks. Short and sweet. That sounds real good. Okay, I would like to thank everybody for participating on the panel. I really appreciate your thought and answers. Thank you very much.